The galaxy we call the Milky Way.
Thank you again. It's great to be here, and I want to welcome those of you who were here last night. And yay! And those who weren't here last night, boo! No, this is a wonderful weekend for us at the Origins Project, and tonight is going to be a great night, and I'm very excited about it. I want to repeat one thing I did say last night for those who weren't here. For me, and for all of us, it is a true privilege to be located in a place, this place, where we can fill up 3,000-seat auditorium for science. It says great things. It's true. It says great things for all of you, and we really appreciate it. But tonight is an amazing evening because without hyperbole, it is true that I don't think there has ever been on one stage an assembly of science storytellers and communicators like this. It's very intimidating, in fact. I've had the good fortune, I realize, to appear on stage with each one of these people individually, but all together. It's going to be an amazing night. And the way it's going to work, when you got great jazz musicians, you allow them to jam. And so the way we're going to do it is we're going to bring everyone out in a minute or two, and everyone's going to tell a little science story for you, to give you a sense of what excites them about science or to how they interpret science. And each one of the people will do that, and that should take a while. And then we'll take a break. Then we'll come back, and we're going to have a discussion. Then we're going to open it up to all of you. I believe you have question cards. If you want to write down your question by the intermission, bring them down, and then we'll choose some questions. And after we have our discussion, we'll try and answer your questions. So that's the way it's going to go. So I want to introduce each of the panelists in order. The first person that I want to introduce is the director of a remarkable festival, which is, I would say, next to the Origins Project, the most amazing science festival in the country, the World Science Festival in New York City, and I've been privileged to be part of it 4 or 5 times. And Tracy Day is the CEO of that, a former broadcast journalist, and puts together this remarkable program of 30 to 40 different science events throughout New York, and with lots of different scientists and musicians, and it's an amazing event, and it's been a privilege for me to be a part of it. So I want to bring out Tracy Day first. Thanks, Tracy. Thank you. Next, I want to bring out an old friend of mine and one of the most well-known physicists in the country. He burst like a supernova on the stage, of the public stage, with his first book, The Elegant Universe. And I think of him as a long-lost son, really. And Brian and I have been together in many venues, and he is really one of the most remarkable and vibrant communicators of physics, particularly particle physics, in the country. And it's really a pleasure to welcome him back to the stage today. Brian? Papa. Okay, enough. That love, I feel it. Thanks, Brian. I'm not turning my back to you, I think. But the next person I want to bring on stage is another old friend, and I've been privileged to be on his program a number of times. And he is really one of the most amazing, he has the most amazing radio program in the country about science. But if you've been on the program and you've experienced it, you can see what an amazing job he does in interviewing people. Brian and I and Ian McEwen were on earlier this week, and when you're on there, you see the incredible talent. And I know that when I try and moderate these panels, what I think is I'm trying to channel Ira Flato. And so I'm happy to bring out Ira Flato.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's okay. Next, I want to bring out a little guy who is now everywhere. He's on TV. He's about to make a new series, a remake of the Cosmos series. And he's the director of the Hayden Planetarium, and in fact, I was privileged enough to be there last week for an event that he moderated. And now I'm going to return that favor to him and not let him talk either. He's a little shy, but I think we can encourage him to come out. Neil deGrasse Tyson. You're over there. Oh, hold on.
No,
you're not over there. You're over there. Sorry. Yeah. It's okay. Next, we have, as I said last night, in my own mind, the person we all look up to as one of the greatest writers about science in the history of science, and someone who changed the way science writing is done and communication is done with his book, A Selfish Gene, which was published almost 40 years ago. And it's a surprise guest because he wasn't in the original program, but he was here last night, and we'd be remiss if we didn't include in this program Richard Dawkins. That's great. Now, the next guy is a real guy. In fact, he's a science guy. And I don't think I have to say anything else. Bill Nye has been an amazing educator on television. I love watching him in Disney World each time I go to Epcot Center. And he's been a pleasure to interact with. He's also the executive director of the Planetary Society, which is a position that Carl Sagan first had. And it is truly a pleasure and a privilege to welcome to the stage Bill Nye. Thank you. You take care of that. An amazing group. And the last person I want to welcome to the stage is a little bit different, but in fact, he communicates science in a different way. In my mind, personally, I think he is the best science fiction writer writing today. He is incredibly prolific. I don't know how he produces what he produces. And I've been with him in a number of events, and he has an incredible following. He weaves science in his stories in a way that very few science fiction writers really do effectively. And it's truly, again, a privilege to welcome Neil Stephenson to the stage. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to begin. If we go to the first slide, actually. And as all of my colleagues will point out to you, it's always about me. And so the story, I want to tell you a little science story, and it's a story about me. In a way, it's a story about what got me interested in science, because I thought that would be appropriate. This person here is Richard Feynman. This young person here is me. And Richard Feynman made me want to be a scientist for a number of reasons. When I was a high school student, I took a special summer program, and I was bored. And the teacher came down and said, "You look bored," and he gave me a book. And in fact, I think if this works, it does. This was the book. It's called The Character of Physical Law by Richard Feynman. And he said, look, this is a book by a guy who won the Nobel Prize recently for proving that antiparticles are particles going backwards in time. Wow, this is amazing. So I took the book home, and I read the chapter. I didn't understand any of it. But it was really neat. But the thing that was important for me, and I hope one of the things I like to tell students, because we tend to teach science, as I said the other night, as if it's done by dead white men. And when I looked at this, I realized, not all the problems are solved. There's still an incredible number of things we need to understand about the universe. And it was the first time that I thought a career in physics might actually be worthwhile. There were things left to discover, that all the great things hadn't been known. And it changed my life completely. Now, like all good physics undergraduates, I'm sure Brian and Neil at very least, I carried around with me the Feynman lectures on physics. He rewrote all of introductory physics in his own style. He was incredibly charismatic and an amazing teacher. And I carried them around. Again, I couldn't understand them. But I thought by osmosis, if I carried them around long enough. It was only when I was a graduate student that I really began to appreciate the depth of those descriptions. And that kind of, as I thought of being an educator, the idea, what was amazing about Feynman was that he conveyed his excitement and his interest and the integrity of science, as I'll talk about in a second. Now, I was lucky enough, as it turned out, when I was an undergraduate, to meet Feynman at a meeting up in Canada. And this was actually taken in for a physics magazine. And I'm pleased we were actually talking physics at that instant. But I spent most of the weekend with him because I brought my girlfriend at the time, and she was one of the few women. And Feynman, if you knew anything about Feynman, he decided to spend most of his time with us. And besides actually teaching me how to dance, he convinced me we had long talks about adventure and seeking out adventure. And I know for him, science was an adventure, and it is for me, but it was everything in life was an adventure. Learning, just the pleasure of finding things out, as he wrote. And that became infectious for me and changed and invigorated me to become a scientist. Now, it turned out many years later, when I was at Harvard, I gave a colloquium at Caltech, where Feynman was teaching. And it was very intimidating, of course, but he asked a good question. Then he came up afterwards to talk to me. And I really wanted to remind him. I was certain he wouldn't remember our weekend together. And he wanted to ask me a question, but there was a very annoying assistant professor who would not stop asking me questions. I'm very happy to say he didn't get tenure. But Feynman walked off, and I thought, well, I'll catch him later. But he died shortly afterwards, so I never was able to tell him what he meant to me. And as a result, I wrote a whole book about Richard Feynman, because for me, he captured the way science is done. I'm going to let him tell you in the last minute his own story, or at least the way he saw science. But I want to tell you one of the facts about science, the kind of things that would amaze him and amaze me. All of you take a breath. Hold it in. I can't see. Are you still holding? No, you can let it out now. Okay, good. Well, there's a possibility, in fact, a likely possibility, that with every breath you take, you are breathing in atoms that Richard Feynman breathed out when he gave the interview I'm about to show you. And every time I'm sitting at my desk, not getting anything done, feeling ignorant and incompetent, I like to think that I'm breathing in atoms from Richard Feynman. And that sense of joy and mystery, to me, is what science is all about. And no one conveyed it better than Feynman, and so I'll let him finish this off in his own words.
You see, one thing is I can live with doubt and uncertainty and not knowing. I think it's much more interesting to live not knowing than to have answers which might be wrong. I have approximate answers and possible beliefs and different degrees of certainty about different things, but I'm not absolutely sure of anything. And there are many things I don't know anything about, such as whether it means anything to ask, why we're here, and what the question might mean. I might think about it a little bit. If I can't figure it out, then I go to something else. But I don't have to know an answer. I don't feel frightened by not knowing things, by being lost in the mysterious universe without having any purpose, which is the way it really is, as far as I can tell, possibly. It doesn't frighten me.
He wasn't frightened, and he loved mysteries, and that's what science is all about, to me. Thanks. Thank you. Gracie, you want to go up next?
I would love to. Am I supposed to stand?
Yeah, you can go stand. You can do whatever you want.
One thing is probably obvious, which is I'm quite different from others on the stage. Actually, I'm quite different in another way. I'm neither a scientist nor a science journalist. And honestly, if my former friends and colleagues, my friends and colleagues saw me on this stage with this group of people, they would laugh because I was actually a broadcast journalist, and I covered wars, I covered politics, I covered many things, but I never covered science. And that is because we all assumed that science was boring and that scientists were boring. And so my story is really about how I discovered that science is a great story. And I did a program in about 1999 called The Century with Peter Jennings, and I was producing a part of it called The Thinkers, and I interviewed many impressive, incredible people. And what I found that the scientists were actually more interesting and more compelling than anyone else I talked to. Actually, there were Richard Dawkins, Green, many others were in that program. And so I realized again that the science stories they were untapped. They were, people didn't realize in the mainstream media that these are great adventure stories and many other things. So in 2005 or so, Brian Green and I co-founded a thing called the World Science Festival, and what we wanted to do was bring science to a general audience in a very new way. We wanted to use all of the storytelling multimedia techniques you could throw at these great stories. And the key thing is we wanted to put the scientists on the stage. They were great communicators, and they often didn't get the chance to do that. So Lawrence is a wonderful participant in the festival. He has been there a number of years. And so he asked me to, as part of this talk, bring a video that would actually show what the World Science Festival is and does. So if we can bring the lights down, we can show a bit of that.
Some of the biggest names in science and the arts have gathered here in New York City for the World Science Festival.
The festival, which has been called a new cultural institution by the New York Times, takes science out of the laboratory and into the streets.
World Science Festival kicks off with a star-studded gala performance hosted by Oscar-winning actor Alan Alda.
Tonight we fly across the cosmos at the speed of art. Scientists and artists come together and give us a view of nature that is both fascinating and fun.
It is my distinct pleasure to dedicate Icarus at the Edge of Time to tonight's honoree. More than any other member of our species, Professor Hawking has traveled closest to the edge of time.
I am very honored by this wonderful evening.
What's such a great adventure about science?
The idea that we can all understand science and not have to be scientists is just a wonderful miracle of this festival.
There's a tremendous appetite in the public for knowing what science is actually accomplishing.
Is life a one-off chance?
Are our genes our destiny?
Is there a mathematical order to nature?
What the hell is mathematics?
Is there aliens in space?
This is what science is about. The excitement, the wonder, the adventure, the discovery.
If you ask me what do I hope to find, I don't know, more cool stuff. To moderate this panel on quantum physics, do you know anything about it?
Well, you know...
The most intimidating audience to teach a short Black Holes 101 course in front of Professor Stephen Hawking.
Give us a thumbnail sketch of the beginning of the cosmos as we now know it.
You can actually do a calculation to find out how many bits are necessary to simulate the universe.
The program here tonight will discuss more dimensions than meet
the eye. Now, string theory, it's multi-dimensional, vibrating strings that are so small that there's no way to ever measure at any imaginable point in the future. And yet, people still take you seriously.
Kinds of things that will be said here on this stage this evening are the kinds of things over which wars have been started.
There's no animal in the animal kingdom that has wreaked the kind of havoc that we have.
Unless we take care of the ocean, nothing else really matters.
You deserve to be punished for doing the wrong thing.
Tonight we're going to explore science and religion. Why do you still have faith in God?
What do you mean still?
You can't predict what's coming next. You can't prove what's coming next. I'll tell you what. You don't care because you're a physicist. If you can't solve a problem, convince yourself that it's not important. Forget about it.
We got to get especially young people interested in science, because by the time they hit school, it is literally crushed out of them.
I think young people care a lot more about science than we did when we were their age.
Who among the young people here would like to go to Mars?
What can people expect from a free street fair?
You won't find falafel or tube socks. This is really wall-to-wall science.
I love the idea that they're taking the exhibits out to the people.
I live for being around great young scientists because the world has amazing possibilities.
I am a mathemagician. That's 300 times 238 plus 31 squared, 71,400 plus 961 is 72,361. Let's hear it for algebra!
Is something beautiful to you because we're hardwired to like beautiful things, or because it relates to reality?
Put your stereo glasses on.
These images, they are artworks of the universe.
The storytelling has to be direct enough to move us from one panel to another panel to another panel.
Science Festival. I'll be there.
So as you can tell from that highlights reel, what we try to do is open up new avenues of entry into science through the arts, through debate, discussion, through Nobel laureates talking to children. And what we hope to accomplish, and based on the people who attend, I mean, it's been 5 years and nearly 1 million people have attended the live events. And the goal, and what we hope will continue, is to move science out of the siloed existence that it tended to be for a general audience and smack into the middle of popular culture where it belongs. So, thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Okay, let me call upon your trailing spouse.
That's right.
Brian.
Thank you. Thank you. So, as I suspect most of you know, you are a very unusual audience, an unusual group that would come out in this enthusiastic way in support of science. I mean, most of the world doesn't see science in that way. Most of the world doesn't see science as a story, right? Most of the world sees science as this collection of facts that they were forced to learn at some point in school and then spit it back on an exam, and they were all too happy to leave it behind after the exam was over. But of course, what could be more human than science, right? Science is about asking questions and observing, exploring the world to try to find the answers. And that's what we do, right? That's what we do since we are even little kids, right? There's so many stories that get that across, but let me just give you one to get things going. So, you know, my son, he's somewhere out here. He's 8 years old, somewhere out there. There he is, right there, yeah, good. Thank you. So when he was about 4.5 years old, I was telling him a lot of bedtime stories, and I was really trying to put some science into the stories, right? You know, so I'd have all these spaceships flying through the universe, but I was always very diligent in saying, they weren't going faster than the speed of light. One night, my son turns back to me and says, "Dad, speed of light? What about the speed of dark?" And it's like a thought I hadn't really had before. But you see, a young mind grappling with these kinds of ideas takes it to an unusual place. And just to be an equal opportunity parent, my daughter's also out there. And yeah, thank you, Sophia. Good, good, good. And, you know, I have, for the last few years, been thinking about ideas that are unfamiliar to most people, the possibility of other universes, the multiverse. I mean, you know, most of us were raised to think universe means everything to begin with, so how could there be other universes? And I say most of us with some forethought because, you know, my kids have heard me talk about this stuff all the time since they were really young. And Sophia, when she was 3.5, I was holding her one day, I said, "Sophia, I love you more than anything in the universe." And she turned back to me and said, "Dad, universe or multiverse?" Now that's how we begin, right? We have these open minds trying to understand everything in the world around us. But as we get older, right, we begin to deal with uncertainty. Like what Feynman was saying, how do you deal with a universe that you don't really understand? How do you deal with cutting-edge ideas that you don't even know if they're right or wrong because they're at the forefront and we haven't been able to test them yet? And I got a taste of how different people deal with that when I wrote The Elegant Universe back in 1999. It came out, you know, it appeared on Amazon, and as you all know, you know, Amazon is this wonderfully democratic approach where anybody can write a review of a book that they've read or haven't read. So a few days after the book appeared, you know, somebody wrote in and gave it 5 stars. I was happy, that was good. And then I read the review and they said they were so happy that someone finally had written a book on string theory that was accessible because they said it's so hard to criticize things you don't understand. And they went on to say that after reading the book, they felt string theory was a bunch of mathematical buffoons chasing their own tails, and finished by saying that the reviewer felt that the author, namely me, seemed to be about as happy as a pig in shit. And what the reviewer was trying to say is, when you don't know if ideas are right or wrong, as it is with some of these cutting ideas about string theory and other things, there can be a deep level of uncertainty. And how do you deal with it? Feynman found it invigorating. Others find it deeply uncomfortable. And that is a wonderful divide in terms of how one goes about exploring the universe. Okay, now for my story. In my final 2 minutes. I got 2 minutes left, right? Okay. So one quick story. A kind of personal story, not that personal a story, but a story about discovery. I mean, what we scientists live for are the rare moments when it all works, right? We're doing a calculation and it all comes together. And this example is one that comes from 1990s, in 1992 or so. I was at the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton. And I was working with a couple colleagues, Dave Morrison, who's normally at Duke at that time, Paul Aspinwall, who's now at Duke as well. And we wondered whether in string theory the universe might evolve in different ways than it could in Einstein's general theory of relativity. Right? In general relativity, we all know that space can stretch, it can expand, it can twist, it can warp. But one thing that can't happen in Einstein's general relativity is space can't tear apart and, say, repair itself. That tearing process would yield to physical phenomenon that would be disastrous, and the mathematics doesn't allow it to happen. We asked whether, in string theory, space might actually rip. So we broke this problem into 2 parts. Dave Morrison and I tried to work out the mathematical calculation that would give us insight into whether or not this tearing process could happen. Paul Aspinwall was working on the computer code that was going to implement these mathematical ideas and do the final calculation to see whether it was possible. And we phrased the calculation in terms of a physical parameter. You can think of it as the mass of a particle. We asked ourselves, if space ripped, would the mass of that particle smoothly change, or would it abruptly change in a way that would establish that that process was discontinuous, couldn't happen? So Morrison and I, we spent months working out the mathematics that needed to be plugged into the computer program. Paul had finished the program, was waiting for our results. It was a Friday night in the Institute for Advanced Study, quiet, right? It's a very quiet place at night. And we finished up, and we wanted to put it into the computer program. So Paul, who'd already gone home, he called him up and said, Paul, can you come back? You know, we finally got it. We can put it in, and we can hit the button and see whether this happens. And Paul said no. It was Friday night, he wanted to watch TV, and he wasn't going to come in. He said it can wait until Monday. So we said, Paul, will you come tomorrow morning? He said, look, the only way I'm going to come tomorrow morning is if you buy me a 6-pack of beer, and it's waiting there for me. We said, okay, it will be waiting. So he came in the next morning, put in our result into his computer program. We all huddled around the terminal, and Morrison hit the enter button. And what we were looking for, what we'd boiled it down to, is if it came out, sort of sounds like Douglas Adams, so it's not, if the number 12 popped out, this is real, if the number 12 popped out of this computer calculation, it meant that space could tear in string theory. So we huddled around, he hit enter, and instead the number popped out was 3.99999. And we're like, oh God, it didn't work. But wait, we said 3.999. It's so close to a whole number. Maybe it's just a round off. I remember it's really 4. And maybe we just lost a factor of 3 somewhere in the calculation. So we go back to the calculation, we put it up on the board. Lo and behold, we find the missing factor of 3. We put it back in, hit the enter button again, and out it comes 11.999999. That's the round off to 12, and it worked. And at that moment, I just ran around the office because we were looking at something that nobody else had seen before. We were looking at evidence that if string theory is correct, that space could tear apart and repair itself in a way that Einstein's ideas would not allow. It was this thrilling moment to look at this new phenomenon coming out of this research, and that is really what science is about. It's those moments where you're looking at reality and you're peeling away a layer that nobody else has been able to peel away before. And it's my strong feeling that we scientists, look, we have those moments rarely, a few times in a career maybe. But if kids could even have a small glimpse of that, even by solving problems that we know already have answers, but that moment of going from confusion to clarity, that transition is what science is, and that's what makes it exciting. And if only more kids would have that experience, I just think it would change the world. Thank you very much.
Now you know why I'm so proud of my boy. Now you know why I'm so proud of my boy. Ira?
Okay. Thank you. The story I'm going to tell tonight is about surprise. Science is all about surprise. Scientists love to be surprised. And when they tell you they're looking for the Higgs boson, they would rather not find it, actually, when you talk to them, because they can still hunt for it and be surprised about finding it later. It's almost disappointing for some of them to actually find it. And you discover this. I've been doing Science Friday for 22 years now, and we will We will continue to do it for another as many years as we can. And during those years, I've interviewed a lot of scientists, and they always, as people, will surprise you by what they say. They are people, and you think you know how they're thinking, you think you know what they're thinking, you've read all about them, you've worked with them over the years, but they will surprise you nonetheless. For example, Oliver Sacks. You know who Oliver Sacks is, the neuroscientist? Yes, he's written a lot of interesting books. And he always comes on Science Friday when he has a new book out. And so one time he was scheduled to come on Science Friday and talk about his new book. And he's such a great interview. We all like to talk to him, but we always give him an hour to talk. Say, come on for an hour, because we really isn't long enough, but that's all we have. But this time, we had a special event, and we could not put an hour for Oliver Sacks. So we called up his producer, his assistant, and we said, you know, we're very sorry. We would like to interview Oliver for an hour, but we can only do 40 minutes. Well, why not? Well, because we have an opportunity no one has ever had before. Someone is searching for a giant squid in the South Pacific. And we have an opportunity to interview the captain of the boat, the scientist on the boat, live for 20 minutes before the end of the hour. So we can only put Oliver on for 40 minutes and not the last 20. I said, I'm sorry, you know. It was a long silence, and the handler said, are you kidding? I thought we were losing Oliver forever. He said, giant squid, that's Oliver's favorite subject. I kid you not. Would you allow him to sit through that whole interview and let him stay on as you're interviewing the scientist? Let him sit there and listen, maybe? We'd be very happy to have him come on for 40 minutes. I said, wow, I never knew this about Oliver. I knew all this kind of stuff would happen. This is very surprising. So sure enough, Friday came around, and Oliver Sacks comes walking into the studio with a T-shirt with a giant squid on it. And in each hand, he has a rubber squid that he is squeezing in one hand after the other. As like a kid in a candy shop, he's going to talk about the giant squid. So I said, Oliver, sit down, and we talk about his book, and I can see that he's squirming to get on to the next interview, but he's not really that interested in his book. So sure enough, 40 minutes after the hour, we come on, and I said, Oliver, you can sit here and wait through the interview if you'd like. We're going to talk to him. He says, yeah, please, let me sit down and wait with you. So we get the captain of the boat on, and he starts talking about his search for the giant squid. And Oliver says, can I ask him a question? Go for it. And he starts talking to, I could sit back and put my feet up now. I know he's doing the interview and talking to the scientist looking for the giant squid. So surprised, so much stuff that you never expect scientists to happen. The other small surprising event I'll talk to you about is when Jane Goodall. Jane Goodall has been on our program, yes, many times. About 10 years ago, I'm going to pull that out of my head because I'm not quite sure she's been on so many times. She came on the program, and once again, we gave her like an hour to herself. And I like to get calls in. It's a talk show, and I like to get the listeners in. And I had used up so much of the hour just in a great conversation with her that I had looked at my watch. I had about 2 minutes left. I have to take one call. Let's go to one call. Guy's on the phone. He says, Dr. Goodall, it's so great to talk to you. Thank you for being on the program. Do you think there is another primate out there that we haven't discovered yet? Gee, I hadn't even thought about asking that myself. And she said, yeah, there really is one. And he said, well, do you think that you're going to actually discover it? She says, yeah, I think we're getting closer and closer. So I said, wait, time out. I'm the third person in this room, and I don't know what the both of you are talking about. Obviously, you two do. But I'm going to take a guess. Are you talking about Sasquatch? Yeti? The abominable snowman? And she said, yes, we are. That's what we're talking about. And I said, Dr. Goodall, do you think that you actually can find one? She said, well, we have fibers now, hairs that have been taken off of trees and things, and maybe we can do DNA analysis and actually figure out what this thing really is. But I really believe that it does exist. My director says in my head, time's up, you're out of time. And it turns out that she had come on in subsequent years and in years that have, she's always admitted that that's what she does believe in the existence of Sasquatch. She wrote a foreword to a book that was entitled The Science of Sasquatch, which did not take any side one way or the other, but just presented the evidence. So my story tonight, and I'll conclude it, is that we are always surprised in doing science as science journalists, and it's such a pleasure to find scientists who are willing to talk and tell us why they are surprised and to share their surprises with us. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Ira. The next speaker never ceases to surprise me, so go ahead.
Okay.
Lawrence, before I begin, I just thought I would, you said that we're all sharing molecules from the breath breathed by Feynman, but you didn't say how that can be true. And so I would like to add information to this, that it is true because for every breath you take, you inhale more molecules of air than there are breaths of air in the entire Earth's atmosphere. And it's because of this fact that any time someone has exhaled in the past, there are enough molecules to spread into everyone's breath. And so what is true for Feynman would be true for any person throughout history, including Genghis Khan, Beethoven, Jesus, whoever is your person.
No, real people.
You're sharing.
Time's up. No, it's okay.
All right. So it was the 1700s, and William Herschel, the most famous astronomer of his day, who had the biggest telescope around, making discoveries that only the biggest of its kind would give you. Because in astrophysics and in particle physics, bigger is actually better. In all cases, essentially. Big telescopes, big particle accelerators, we're together on that one. William Herschel is very well known. He's wealthy. He's funded by the King of England, King George. By the way, that's the George of American Revolution fame, the one where John Hancock wrote large so that even King George will be able to see the signature. Herschel, kind of by accident, discovers a planet beyond Saturn, the first human being ever to make such a discovery. All planets closer to the sun than what Herschel discovered are quite visible to the unaided eye at night. So no one person is credited with any of their discoveries. Cavemen saw these planets. So he wanted to name it after his funder, which is what any good scientist would do if you want to keep the money flowing. So for a brief period there, about 5 years or 7 years or so, the solar system was Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and George. Okay. I have books from that slice of time that enumerates the planets, and there's George right there. So clearer heads would ultimately prevail, and the planet would be named for Roman gods, as the other planets have been named, and thus was born Uranus. However, you didn't want to piss off the British because they were really powerful at the time, and so as sort of recompense, the moons of the planet Uranus, rather than named for Greek characters in the life of the Greek counterpart of the Roman god after whom the planet is named, So, for example, Jupiter has Ganymede, one of its moons. Ganymede was the manservant of Zeus. Zeus is the corresponding god to Jupiter. In that way, the Greek and Roman heritage of this whole activity is honored. So Uranus is the lone exception in the solar system to this, and all of its planets are named after Shakespearean fictional characters. That to keep the British calm. Now, I say all this, and that's not even the story I'm going to tell you. I'm going to talk about his son, John Herschel. John Herschel, also an astronomer, not quite as well known as William, but in my field we all know who and what he is and what he accomplished. One of the things he did in the early 1800s was essentially invent color photography. He made major contributions to putting an image of reality onto something that captured that reality for others to share. Arguably one of the most important inventions for the recording of scientific data there ever was. That was in 1839. He called it the cyanotype. Time would move on. We would not perfect color photography for a century after that, really, but photography was born in the mid-1800s. The first war to be captured by photography was the American Civil War, the 1860s. Film was not very sensitive to light, so you had to sit for long periods of time. That's why there were no action photos from the middle of the 1800s. And in fact, if you were posed for the photo and you just like scratched your nose, you were a blur in the image. Now, why? I'm taking you down this road because in that era, for the first time, a portrait of you did not require an artist. You would hire an artist if you were wealthy to paint your picture. And you'd want it to be accurate or make you possibly look a little better. Over that period, from 1840 through the 1860s, all of a sudden, art did not have to capture reality. It was no longer the obligation of the artist because we had photographs to do that. And in that period, Impressionism was born, where the artist said, I'm not going to paint what I see, I'm going to paint what this image feels like to me. 1888, we're still in this period. Van Gogh, in the early morning hours. Van Gogh paints. I know some of you were worried I didn't have a cosmic tie on or my vest. I wasn't going to let you down. All right, so he paints this. It's called The Starry Night. And I bring up this painting for several reasons. First, we know it was painted in the pre-dawn hours because that's the only way the moon can be angled that way towards the horizon in the northern hemisphere. That makes this pre-dawn. We're pretty sure the brightest of these stars is Venus. Venus, the planets are typically what come out first in the evening, which is why most of your wishes have not come true. You've been wishing on planets. All right, so that's just how that works. But planets can also be in the early morning sky, as was this painting. By my read of paintings ever drawn. When I look at this, there's a foreground. There's a cypress tree. There's a village. There's a church steeple. But he didn't call the painting Sleepy Village, cypress tree, church steeple, hills. It is the first painting that I know of. I don't claim perfect knowledge, but I looked hard. It is the first painting I know of where the background is the subject of the painting. And that background is the night sky. And it is elevated the cosmos to become fair game to the artist. And I submit to you that science, scientific discovery, especially cosmic discovery, does not become mainstream until the artists embrace the fruits of those discoveries. So I applaud Vincent van Gogh for thinking that the sky is what mattered more than anything else in the foreground for this painting. And one point which I will end on because my time has run out. Sorry.
I'm sorry, Neil.
Yeah. So, I forgot what I was going to say.
Start over.
So,
the sky is the subject of the painting.
Yes, thank you.
The first time in history.
Thank you, sir. Right.
The sky has entered the mainstream.
The sky is the subject of the painting.
The sky is the mainstream.
Over that time, from the 1880s into the 1900s, many discoveries were being published. Newspapers came of age in a big way so that the dissemination of cosmic discovery was shared by all. And I submit that opened up a new era of the public awareness of cosmic discovery. The popularity of Einstein in 1905, right up through 1916, that continued to rise because media took charge. And so I see that as sort of a watershed period that is continuing to this day with things such as the World Science Festival. The fact that there are radio programs that value this, that people listen to and care about. One last point. I had criticized the sky over the sinking ship of the Titanic to Jim Cameron. I was nipping at his heels for 10 years on this, and he finally actually fixed the night sky. And and called me a son of a bitch, but in a loving way. It was a loving son of a bitch. I was asked, given how nitpicky I was about the wrong sky over Kate Winslet as she floated on that plank, they said, what do I think about the Van Gogh sky? Clearly that's not accurate. My reply was, in the case of the artist, I don't want them to represent reality because I have that via my own telescopes. I want and I need the artist to take me to new places. And the new place Van Gogh took me is not the sky as it is, but the sky as he felt it. And the more of us that feel the universe, the better off we will be in this world. Thank you.
Back on. Put it back on. Here we go. 12 minutes.
I just
I think we have some time left. I do want to say two things. First of all, you notice Pluto is not on this chart. And secondly,
get over it.
And are you sure? And what really, actually, the other thing that really worried me for those of us backstage in the dressing room was, well, you haven't seen the underwear, but in any case, moving from something to something else. I don't want to say it. Let me call on Richard. Thank you.
Without ever violating the laws of physics in any way whatsoever, Darwinian natural selection has put together on this planet, and I would conjecture on rather a lot of other planets as well, something utterly extraordinary. The world of complexity, which is unknown to physicists, the world of complexity, which is the world of biology, and on this planet at least has produced the human brain, which is capable of understanding the process that gave rise to it, capable of making a model of the universe in which we stand. I have coined the phrase the genetic book of the dead to describe the gene pool of a species, in the sense that the chisels of the sculptor, which is natural selection, work away at carving the shape of the gene pool of the ancestors of every animal and plant alive, carving it into the shape required for the animals concerned to survive in their particular environment. And what that means is that the gene pool of, say, a camel is a kind of description of ancestral deserts. The gene pool of an antelope is a description of the savanna of the ancestors. It's a description of the lions or leopards that the ancestors escaped from. And reciprocally, the gene pool of a lion is a coded description of the prey that the ancestral lions caught. So the gene pool of every species is a unique informational description of the ancestral worlds in which they survived. And mostly all the genes in the gene pool share the same ancestral history. They all share the same, we could almost call it, experience of the past, ancestral experience. But wouldn't it be interesting to find a place where some of the genes in the gene pool have had a different ancestral experience from others? This would be a critical, almost an experimental test. And I want to tell you a story about one such example. Cuckoos. The European cuckoo parasitizes quite a large number of different species. You know they're brood parasites. You know that the female does not lay an egg in her own nest. She goes and finds a nest of a host species. It might be a hedge sparrow, it might be a meadow pipit, it might be a reed warbler, it might be a robin, and deposits an egg in the nest, having removed one egg from the host nest. The young cuckoo hatches out first, before its foster siblings, and then the first thing it does is to toss out the eggs of the other, of the foster species. The young cuckoo, the first thing it does, it gets the egg into a sort of hollow in its back, and it shuffles its way backwards over the edge of the nest, tosses the egg out. Obviously, it has no idea why it does it. It's got no idea of anything very much. This is built into the nervous system. And the cuckoo has many, many other fascinating adaptations to its brood parasitic way of life. Now, here's the point. The same species, Cuculus canorus, the same species parasitizes a large number of different host species, and when it lays an egg in each of the nests, each host species, The eggs mimic those of the host species. So when a female cuckoo lays an egg in a reed warbler nest, the egg that it lays looks like reed warbler eggs. When it lays it in meadow pipit nests, the egg is dark, almost black. It looks like a meadow pipit egg, and so on. How can this happen? How can the female cuckoo possibly produce the right kind of egg, given that it's got the same genes as all the other cuckoos in the species? It's all one species. It's a bit of a mystery, and the answer is almost certainly known, and it comes back to my point about different parts of the gene pool having different experience. Each female cuckoo learns the nature of the nest in which she herself was brought up. So there are females who are brought up in robin nests, and they return when they're adults to robin nests and lay eggs in robin nests. A female that was brought up in a reed warbler nest, when she grows up, she will return to reed warbler nests. Well, that's all very well, but they're still the same species. Now, here's the thing. As you know, in mammals, sex determination is done by an XX-XY system, such that males have different sex chromosomes. One is called Y, one is called X. Females have the same X and X. And if you work it out, when you cross an XX and an XY, 50% of the offspring will be XY male, 50% will be XX female. So a Y chromosome in a mammal like us has only had experience of male bodies back through history. X chromosomes have had, 2/3 of their time in female bodies and 1/3 in, have I got that right? I can't be bothered to work it out. But the point is that in birds, it's the other way round. In birds, it's the female sex, which is XY, and the male sex, which is XX. So there is one part of the genome of a female cuckoo which has only ever had experience of female bodies, and a robin cuckoo female, her Y chromosome can look back on a long history of nothing but robin nests. Well, not quite nothing but at least for a long way, nothing but robin nests. A reed warbler female has got a Y chromosome that can look back on a long history of reed warbler nests. All the other genes in the genome can look back on a mixed history of all the different species that are parasitized. But the Y chromosome has unique experience. And so the whole thing is explained on the hypothesis that egg coloration is carried on the Y chromosome. And that enables females to be specialists in one particular kind of host. They learn which kind of host they were brought up in themselves, and so this learning process sees to it that the Y chromosome has this unique experience. Now, every now and again, a female cuckoo will, of course, make a mistake. They're not perfect. Nothing's perfect. So a reed warbler cuckoo, for example, may by mistake lay an egg in a robin nest. And of course, her egg will then be very conspicuous. It won't look right. And the chances are that it'll be killed. It'll be thrown out by the foster parent. But that's how these new genties, as they're called, female races, these new genties come into being by the females making a mistake. Now, if you look at the perfection of the egg mimicry in the different genties, the different races of females, only females have races. The males are all the same race, if you see what I mean. Robin cuckoos are exceedingly poor mimics of robin eggs. Meadow pipit cuckoos are exceedingly good mimics of meadow pipit eggs. And the hypothesis of Nick Davies, who's the main person who worked on this, is that cuckoos and their hosts are engaged in what's been called an evolutionary arms race. Arms races occur between predators and prey, parasites and hosts. And the idea is that robin cuckoos have only recently entered upon their arms race with robins. And therefore, neither the cuckoos have had time to develop perfection of egg mimicry, nor have the robins had time to develop perfection of discriminating the eggs. And that's why the egg mimicry is poor, and yet it still works. Whereas meadow pipits have been engaged in a much longer arms race against meadow pipit cuckoos, and that's why both of them have reached perfection, have reached a much higher level of perfection. On the cuckoo side, the egg mimicry, and on the meadow pipit side, the discrimination. Isn't nature wonderful?
Cool. Fantastic story. Fantastic story.
Bill? Cuckoos?
Cuckoos. Sort of. Ah, great. Science! Thank you all. It's so good to see you. Unlike, I believe, all of my colleagues, I am an engineer. I mean, let me emphasize, like my colleagues, I'm a human, but engineer. And maybe some of you saw that right away. People recognize you at parties. Hey, you're an engineer. Your pants don't reach the floor, that's how you can tell. Hey, listen, man, can you fix the blender? I mean, you're the engineer. Yeah, I can fix the blender. Here's what you do. Hold the plug in the wall firmly. And then just hold the blender motor under some cold running water. Now, see, that's funny if you're scientifically literate. So my older brother, tremendous influence on me, had a wonderful physics teacher, Woodrow Wilson High School, Washington, D.C. And he told my brother this story, who told me this story. Michael Faraday, in 1828, then through 1831, would do the Christmas lectures in London, which is back east someplace. And he did this demonstration where he had a coil of wire on one end of a laboratory bench connected to another coil of wire by two wires, the terminal wires of the coils. So he goes down here with a bar magnet, reasonably powerful magnet, which you could find in those days, and moves it, if I may, in and out of the coil, with respect to the coil. And then, now, here's the thing, I was in college, okay? And I don't want to trouble you, I know there are a lot of grown-ups here and stuff, but that never goes away. It's still funny. The X, Y, X, it's still there. So he moves the magnet at this end of the table, and the compass needle moves at this end, as if by magic. But of course, it wasn't magic, it was science! Yes. So the story was embellished. And it was presented to me that he did this demonstration with such success so often that he presented it to the Queen of England. And the Queen of England is supposed to have said to him, Mr. Faraday, of what use is it? And here's where I just admire the guy, and I admire what we in the United States perceive as the British way of thinking. He did not say, lady! What? Are you, would you look? That's at that end, I'm at this, I'm not touching it. What? Are you high? I mean, come on. But that's not what he said. According to the story, he said, "Madam, of what use is a newborn babe?" Now, I don't know how much time you have spent with newborn babes, but they're not that useful. They're loud, and they leak, and there's a lot of times they don't seem to understand a word you say to them. But with that said, everybody, first of all, I mean, looking with all due respect, it was King George IV at first, and then it was William IV, so there was no queen involved. When I did the Science Guy show, we had a researcher who was very diligent about this, and he never presented it to the monarch. He presented some woman, a normal person, came up to him and asked him this question. But look around, everybody. Everything in this room, everything, the lights, the curtains, the paint, the clothes you're wearing, the upholstery, the floor, the stage, everything here owes its existence to that discovery, to the discovery that not only is there a connection between electricity and magnetism, but there's a connection between electricity and the moving of the magnetism, the flux. And that discovery, dare I say it, changed the world. But this process of science that this guy spent, I guess, he took tremendous pride in his demonstrations, and he really perfected this to show it to people. This discovery had a deep effect on me. Now, when I was a kid, I delivered the newspaper. I was a paper boy. That was the title. In the Washington Post on Sundays, there'd be Ripley's Believe It or Not. And it's still there. It was a different paper, but still there. And it would say from time to time, they would run the story roughly, according to aerodynamic theory, bumblebees cannot fly. And this made quite an impression on me. And I spent some time watching bumblebees. And it became clear to me that the bees are fine. The problem is with the theory. So I wonder, continually, how many things are right under our nose that we just don't know anything about. I had a Sky Streak airplane, which are still manufactured, and the older boys showed me how to lubricate the rubber motor with dishwashing soap, and I wound that thing up, man. I wound up that rubber band, and I got the thing wound up 350 turns, man. And I read on the back of the package that you can steer the aircraft by bending the vertical tail, the rudder, making a rudder, sort of. Bend. Now, okay, this is an eyewitness account, and it's from one guy. Eyewitness accounts are imperfect, and this is the way I remember it, okay? Now, most of the time when you operate these aircraft, if you've ever tried it, it's two hands. You throw it like that, or you throw it like that. But one time I threw it, and it made 3 perfect circles, and it came right back to my hand, like a boomerang with Bugs Bunny or something. And then I realized that I could influence objects. I realized that if you could understand things enough, you could make things and shape things and imagine traveling around the world. And you could do it with a balsa wood airplane. Just think what you could do if you worked for a big company like Boeing. And that's what I ended up doing. I worked on 747s. Relax, everybody. I was very well supervised. But these things that happen to you when you're a little kid influence you so much. And I'll bet you everybody in here is a science enthusiast, got excited about it before you were 10 years old. And this passion, this drive to know our place in the universe is what makes us special. It's what makes our species worthy. And with this PB&J, this passion, beauty, and joy, we can, dare I say it, change the world. Thank you. Be engineers, you people. Thank you.
Yeah,
It's very good. You know, now that I've tried this, I don't think I can live without it.
Neil, you want to talk about our world or another one? So,
this one.
Okay.
So actually a parallel universe to this one called Ames, Iowa, which is the town where I grew up. It's the home of Iowa State University, which is a school that in a lot of ways is similar to this one. The main difference being that unlike ASU, ISU is not embedded in a great big city, so it's a kind of a self-contained academic community out on the high prairie. And Ames, different universities develop different sort of areas of specialization depending on who's working there and what they're good at. And one thing that Iowa State got pretty good at in the middle of the 20th century was metallurgy. And so when metallurgy became a really important topic during the Manhattan Project, some of the people in Ames were called upon to make use of their skills in refining uranium. So I'm not talking about enriching uranium, which is a more difficult process and requires bigger equipment. I'm talking about the simple process of taking the ore that is mined out of the ground and producing a fairly pure sample of uranium from that. They needed it because a few hundred miles off to the east in Chicago, in a racquetball court, the world's first atomic pile was being constructed. The way this thing was built is basically a big cubical stack consisting largely of blocks of really pure graphite. And among the graphite was uranium in a sort of roughly spherical configuration. And based on the calculations that they had done with the samples of uranium that they had a pretty good idea of how big that sphere was going to have to be in order for them to get the critical reaction that they were looking for. So they built this thing up one layer at a time using the uranium that they could get, and at some point a new kind of uranium started coming in from my hometown, which is called Spedding's eggs. So Frank Spedding was a metallurgist who worked there, and he and some of the people he worked with had come up with a new way of refining uranium, which is based on the thermite reaction. So I don't know if you know about thermite. It's a very popular chemistry experiment among young and old pyromaniacs, but you take basically rust. I thought that would bring some people out of the woodwork. You take basically rust and aluminum and mix them together, and once you get it lit, which is difficult to do, but once it gets going, it's incredibly exothermic and it's spectacular, and you end up with molten metal all over the place. So anyway, it's a good way of getting oxygen stripped off of one metal and moving it over to another one, and that was what they needed to do in the case of refining this uranium. Of course, just making a big pile of powder out in the middle of the prairie and setting fire to it wasn't exactly the right way to go about it. And so they built these sort of crucibles, these really thick-walled crucibles in which they would mix the ingredients, and then they would weld it shut and set fire to the thing, and the reaction would take place inside. And much, much later, it would cool off to the point where they could go and open up the canister, and inside would be this beautiful little oval sort of this hardened puddle of uranium, hence the term Spedding's eggs. Not quite like cuckoo eggs, but much more powerful in a certain way. So these were then put on trucks and transported to Chicago and incorporated into the atomic pile. And these eggs were so much purer than the uranium that they had been working with up to that point that they actually had to change the design of the pile at that point. So if you look at a cross-section of that pile as it was finally built, the bottom part of it is a perfect geometric sphere, but the top part is a kind of flattened oblate sphere, because they realized that they didn't have to have as much uranium because they were getting better stuff from my hometown. So that was the kind of place that I grew up. There were kids in my Boy Scout troop whose dads had been present in that racquetball court when the reactor went critical. There were, this is kind of a digression, but one of my favorite aspects of that experiment was that they were worried that it might go out of control, and so they had buckets full of a solution that was known to be a poison for this reaction, a very potent damper of this reaction. And so standing on top of the pile, they had graduate students holding buckets of this stuff, and their job was to dump this stuff into the pile if the needle went beyond a certain level, which it would do very, very quickly if it happened. But on no account were they to spill even a drop of it into the pile beforehand, because it would completely destroy the utility of the pile and they would have to rebuild it. So anyway, for the rest of the Manhattan Project and after the war, Ames was still a place where a lot of that kind of research went on. And I can remember going into, I think it was Spedding Hall at the university, and seeing under glass a wine bottle covered with the signatures of the people who were present when the experiment had succeeded. I don't know if it was there permanently or on loan, but it was one of these cheap Italian wine bottles that's in a little basket, and the scientists had all signed their names on the wicker surrounding the bottle. And later on, when I was in college, I worked as a research assistant in a lab there, and I can remember talking to a crusty old technician who liked to give the young guys a hard time, and he took a bar of metal about the size of a pencil out of an envelope on his desk, and he handed it to me. He said, "What do you think that is?" And I began weighing it in my hand and guessed all of the dense metals I knew of, like osmium, because I was a smart little physics major and I knew what all the heavy metals were. And when I had run down the list of all of them, he told me that I was holding a bar of uranium in my hand. So I kind of froze up for a second, and he snatched it out and stuffed it into an envelope and said, "You probably shouldn't hold that for very long." So with that as background, I'll quickly tell a story from my Boy Scout troop, just sort of going back to Bill's comments about getting a passion for science when you're young. Boy Scouts do all kinds of projects to learn about different things, and one of the projects that we were supposed to be doing was growing plants. And growing plants is a thing that happens quite a bit in Iowa, and so it didn't seem like a terribly interesting project on its own. And so some of the dads in our troop decided they were going to enliven the thing by adding a little sciencey twist. And so one of them got some corn seeds that were as close to sort of genetically identical as he could make them. They probably had all come off the same cob or something. And he took them across campus and gave them to one of the metallurgists, who went down into the hot room, buried deep below the building, and picked them up with a remote manipulator arm and put them over a thick lead glass wall and set them down next to a highly radioactive isotope for some period of time, and then plucked them back out, brought them to the safe side of the wall, and took them to our next Boy Scout meeting and handed them out to us. And our instructions were to take them home, plant them, water them, and bring our plants back in a few weeks' time. And one of us, there would be one prize given out for the tallest plant, and another prize given out for the weirdest mutation. And so we all participated in that project, and my plants died because I'm that kind of guy. I am the notorious black thumb, but we got both kinds of plants, both sort of fully normal-looking corn plants and other plants that were not identifiable as corn by anyone who's ever seen corn, and we had all seen it. So that's what it was like growing up in my town, and it's an interesting and touching thing about that place that I didn't realize how weird that was until I had left that town and gone off to places where, when I would tell stories like that, people would look at me in a very funny way. So thank you.
You know, when I was a kid, I worked at a folk festival, and I love music, although I'm not very musical. And I remember specifically a few events where the best musicians in the festival would be asked to improvise. And it was amazing, because you'd see the first one, and it would just blow you away. And then you think, oh, the poor second guy. And they'd blow you away. And what you watched was this incredible buzz of talent and excitement, because each person was excited by the person before them. And you know, when I put this together, we had no plans. I just thought, we'll wait and see what happens. And I hope that you felt the same buzz that I felt on this stage. It was just amazing. Now, what we're going to do, I've decided that there's no need for us to discuss anymore between ourselves, from what I've heard. So we will take a break, and we're going to go directly to the questions from the audience, because I think I'd like you to have a chance to interact with these people, and I'm in awe of them. And let's thank them once again. Excellent. Okay, we've selected, they've been great questions, and we won't have time to get through all of them, but we'll see what we can do. And I'm going to, some of them are directed at individual people, most of them aren't. And so I'll just throw it open, and people can answer for each one. This one, the first one we'll start with, I think it's an interesting one. It says, from Anne, if you could give us all a one-word piece of advice for our own science storytelling, what would it be? And P.S., thanks for showing us how sexy science is. I don't think that referred to your shirt, but it's okay. So, one, you know, that we can probably do. One word, I guess we can go across, or if you want. Well, you don't have to be everyone. Anyone want to give a one-word piece of advice? Yes, go ahead.
Algebra. Learn algebra.
Ooh. I got one word. Yep.
I got one word. That one word is ambition. That is something not encoded by any practicing exam in the school system. Yet, in fact, if you look at the most successful people there ever were, they are not the ones necessarily who got straight A's. Those are the ones who had ambition, which overrides it all.
Yeah, okay. I agree. It's a long word, but it's a good one. I would say passion. I think, in the terms of storytelling, too many people, we said this last night too, too many people, I think, are afraid to inject their own story or their own passion when they're talking about it at science. But if you don't talk about what you're interested in, no one else is going to be interested in it.
Empathize?
What?
Empathize, because the best people, the best teachers of science and the best writers about science are the ones who can empathize with people who don't quite get it yet.
I was going to say the same thing.
Anyone else want to throw in? You've been jumping ahead? No?
I would just say,
Richard. Yeah.
What?
I was going to say emphasizing exactly for the same reason, but I'll say instead poetry then.
Poetry. Excellent. Excellent. Anyone? Don't have
I would
to.
just say that you should be able to tell it so that your mother can understand it.
Hey, that's good. My mother never listens, but it's okay.
And if your mother's a theoretical physicist?
yeah, that's right. That's right.
She should tell you that.
All right, fine. Thanks.
Okay, here's one that's actually a little bit related to what Neil was just talking about, but I think we can expand on it. Anita says, I've always wanted to be an astronautical engineer, but I am horrible at math, but I've got lots of passion. Can this dream ever be a reality, and where do I start? So it's an interesting, I guess I'll start with that. I mean, I think, as Bill said, math is the language of science, and I think you have to be able to be adept at it.
Math is the language of the universe.
Yes, you're right. I agree with you there.
Brian?
I agree, but let me just finish, and then we can. Too many people think that you have to be a mathematical wizard to be even a physicist. I mean, much less an engineer. But it takes all types. I know people who've won the Nobel Prize. I know people. You don't have to be the best mathematician in your class. You don't have to be a whiz. It takes all types to do science, and that any stereotype just doesn't work. If you're interested, do it.
What's that have to do with you knowing Nobel laureates?
Who were not the best in their class.
Oh, fine, thank you. Okay.
And who weren't necessarily even that strong in math.
Okay.
But the other thing, I'll just say, you say you're bad at math. I bet you're not that bad. And I just want to remind you that when it comes to math, there's no substitute for practice. It sucked for me. It sucks for, you just have to practice. So when you come to me and say, oh, I'm bad at math, I am open-minded, of course, but skeptical. I'll bet you can do it, whoever you are.
That's an important point. We were talking about it last night, too, and it touches on what you said. I like science museums often because they show science is fun, but science is hard work, like anything, to do, like music, like anything else, to do it well. And it takes a lot of work. So and if you don't enjoy it, you can't do the work. But just enjoyment alone isn't enough. You've really got to be willing to work at it.
I think what's really going on here is people presume that in order to be good they presume that if the math is not coming easy, that therefore you'll never learn it. And I meant it literally, that math is the language of the universe, and it's like any other language, especially a language that does not share the Roman alphabet. So, for example, if you wanted to study Chinese, it looks completely intractable at first.
It looks like Greek.
Exactly. And you can ask the question, how long does it take one to become fluent in Chinese if you're not Chinese yourself? And so it can take years, 5 years, almost 10 years if you never go to China. You go to China maybe 5 years of intensive exposure, and you've never done that with math. Imagine that level of exposure to math, what kind of fluency you would have at the other end of that pipeline. So at least give yourself the opportunity that any person learning a foreign language would give themselves before you turn around and say you're not good at math.
Brian,
get me started.
Yeah, you don't want to get him started. I know that from experience. You're a professor of math as well as physics, probably the only one on the table.
Yeah, and the question that comes to mind for me is, How do you know that math is the language of the universe?
I was going to say, what about the multi?
The universe told me.
Pretty good first approximation, I'll tell you.
Okay, we're now doing science by revelation.
Lawrence,
but-
before you go, I'm
yeah.
just wondering, because I have a question about this.
Yeah.
Could you imagine that one day far in the future we encounter some alien civilization and they say, hey, show us what you've done to understand the universe, and we bring out our math books with all our theorems in physics, and they turn around and say, math, we tried that. Yeah, it takes you just so far. And the real way to do it is like this.
I would say that whatever that real way is not manifest to us at this moment. And until that day happens, where an alien tells us how backwards we are, all I can say is that the math that we did invent out of our human brain, as you surely know, Eugene Wigner said, the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics in describing the universe, the fact that it works at all is sufficient enough for me.
But here I want to have a note.
And just because you still can't figure out your string theory, don't come crying to me. Don't come crying to me because you can't figure it out.
No, in fact,
You got him started. See, you got him started.
Said don't get me started.
Get him started.
No, but I want to go on record.
He warned you not to get him started.
Yeah, I know, I told you. But I want to go on record. And this is a momentous occasion, I want to go on record as agreeing with Brian.
Is anybody keeping the record?
But no, in the sense that it is fascinating if you're a theoretical physicist to wonder when you find something fascinating, whether some mathematical formalism fascinating, whether it's a property of our brains or whether it's a property of the universe, and we just don't know. I think is the answer. If string
right,
theory
but
looks
let me
great,
ask you a question. I find it slightly confusing because Neil, you describe math as something that we create. So why is it the thing that we create is somehow intrinsic to the universe?
Isn't that
That's
awesome?
our description.
It's remarkably surprising.
It is the description.
I don't lose sleep over that. I celebrate it.
It's a good thing. I celebrate it too.
Yeah, but it is a question. There may be limitations on understanding the universe because of the way our brains work, and I think
that's surely the case. That's surely the case.
And for Republicans, it's already happened. But it's no, but seriously, that's an interesting question, and we really have to wonder about that. And if you're again working as some of us are at the forefront of physics, you wonder at some point when it's going to end.
It's some Republicans.
Yeah.
Well, but to the questioner's question, I wouldn't worry about the possibility that mathematics is going to turn out to be ineffective in describing the universe, and use that as a reason to not keep practicing. Press on.
That's right. Okay, next question.
Could be an engineering perspective.
Yeah, no, there you go. Excellent. Next question from Joel. What do you believe or hope will be the most significant scientific advancement over the next few decades? And I know I have a pat answer to this, but I'll wait to see if anyone else has one. No?
We don't know what the next most significant scientific discovery is going to be, for crying out loud.
Well, exactly. The point I always say, if I knew what
why
it
are
would
you
be-
guys exploring Mars? What are you going to find there? We don't know. That's why we're going.
Yeah.
Crying out loud.
Great. And as a
Wait. That's not
go
fair.
on.
Wait. No, there are two kinds of exploration. One of them is I have no idea what I'm looking for, but maybe I'll find it when I see it.
Okay.
Another kind of explanation.
You can't argue with him. I've learned it. It's
Another kind of exploration is we think we know what's going on and we want to test our hypotheses. That's another kind of exploration. And one of them is there life somewhere else? We know there's life in at least one place in the universe, and that's called Earth. So what I want to do is go to the frozen surface of Jupiter's moon Europa, cut a hole, go ice fishing down there, put a submersible, see if something swims up to the camera and licks the lens. That's what I want to look for. Look for life. Life.
But Neil, you were looking for something. When was the last time you just went, I hope to discover something. No, you're always looking for something.
No, but whenever we look
not
for
bad.
something, we are often surprised. And I think that the point is that if we really could anticipate the progress of science, it almost, in some sense, wouldn't be worth doing, because it means we'd already kind of know where we're going and what the answers are. And I think so when people ask me, what's the next great thing, I say, if I knew, I'd be doing it right now. And so I think there is this sense we are driven by questions, interesting questions, but often those questions lead us to answers that lead to more interesting questions that are totally different than the ones we came up with.
I say not just often, but most times.
Yeah, so I think that...
But you can say something about the question which you really would wish to know the answer to. And, I mean, for me, it would be what's consciousness? Because that's totally baffling.
Richard, you know what I think?
I agree.
Not that you asked, but what I think on this is consciousness has kind of baffled us for a while, okay? And evidence that we haven't a clue about what consciousness is drawn from the fact of how many books are published on the topic, right? We're not really continuing to publish books, not really, on like Newtonian physics. It's done, all right? So the fact that people keep publishing books on consciousness is the evidence we don't know anything about it, because if we knew all about it, you wouldn't have to keep publishing. So what I wonder, Richard, is whether there really is no such thing as consciousness at all, and that there's some other understanding of the functioning of the human brain that renders that question obsolete.
To that, I've got to say, like, oh, wow.
Perfect. Okay.
And am I like thinking, or am I just like thinking that I'm thinking? Wow.
Will you stop with that?
Richard. We went decades not understanding the precession of Mercury. It was this big mystery, and we invented solutions to it, like a mysterious planet Vulcan tugging on it such that it's perihelion precessed. And that wasn't the explanation at all. It was obviously general relativity, another thing, not the original question we were asking. So you say you want to know what consciousness is. Maybe that's not even the right question.
How about this? What's the nature of consciousness?
Excellent. Okay, let's move on. Actually, Tracy, I think I want to direct this one to you.
Who's you?
To Tracy. That's not Neil.
I'll be happy.
Okay. Okay, it says here, science has recently become somewhat trendy, popping up in the show The Big Bang Theory or in I Beep Loving Science on Facebook.
She's here.
I know she's here. Okay. Often the focus is not actually on the science, but making entertainment out of science. Is this ultimately good for science, do you think? So I think you have a perspective on that.
Yeah, I do. I don't think when it's done well, it's diminishing the science or the scientists for that matter. I think that what is really spectacular is when you can take high-level science and apply storytelling and all kinds of things that we know help people learn about a subject. I mean, we learned in, again, broadcast news. I was with ABC News for many years, and if anyone said, well, we must do that story because it's very, very important, we knew that was just death because, eat your peas journalism or eat your peas writing, you must know this because it's important, is just, it's never going to light a fire in people's imaginations, children or adults. So I don't think it's turning, entertainment is not a bad word, as long as you continue to preserve and communicate the real stuff, the real science. And that's the philosophy we apply to this. We didn't want to do, nod to science and then go off and tap dance. I mean, it was really engaging with the material, but recognizing that sometimes this stuff is really hard. And you need to write it well, act it well, and
produce it well. And I have to say, you do a great job of producing. I think you really do.
I only wanted to answer that question. All you have to look at is what is going on in this stage tonight. This is entertainment.
I hope so.
This is absolute entertainment. I'm sitting here just watching. I'm ducking out of the way sometimes, but I'm sitting here watching, and it's making a point about science and how to convey and how to make science interesting to the public. You're getting into these.
Yeah, I agree.
This is how to do it.
I think fun and entertainment are overrated.
That's because you're British. That's because you're British.
No.
It's okay.
People are more alike than they are different.
Science is hard, but it's worth it. It's fascinating, it's enthralling. But if we only talk about the bits that are fun and make bangs and smells and things, then we don't do science justice. I was once, we use the phrase dumbing down, and we mustn't do that. I once gave a speech at a British conference about the public communication of science, and I was ranting against dumbing down. And at the end, some man got up and said, "This is not an exaggeration, this is a true story." He said, "Maybe we need dumbing down in order to bring women and minorities into science."
We're gonna get there because there are a few questions about that. In fact,
That's why we fought a war to get out of England and start a new country.
I have to say, he was booed in the original.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, good, absolutely. And we actually, speaking of that, we are going to have Larry Summers here at one of our events next year, so you can ask him about that if any of you know about that. But anyway, the question is, the next question is, many of you are involved or aligned with the skepticism movement. How do you keep an open mind scientifically without using skepticism as an excuse for inaction? Can a person be a proactive skeptic? And I think that's an interesting question.
Are you kidding?
I knew you'd
So I think, Lawrence, correct me, but people confuse, in the modern word that's been made up, is conflate the word cynicism with the word skepticism. And they're two different words.
Yeah.
But I mean, I know not a lot of young people, but one is you're not going to pay any attention to anything. You just think everything's screwed up and nothing's ever going to work out right. That's cynicism. But skepticism is you're presented with evidence and you do your best to draw conclusions based on that. So, as the saying goes, I am Bill Nye, do you believe in ghosts? No. However, I'd love to see one. And bring it on. So, I am open-minded to the idea, but the more I look into it in a skeptical frame of way of thinking, the less likely it seems. But bring it on. When I was young, the universe was slowing down. Well, it turns out that's not, right? Mm-hmm. Do I run in circles screaming? Or do I go, that's cool? But I do want to know why. Yeah.
And well, you know, and I think that's the point. Is being wrong is really the most exciting thing in science.
Yeah.
And in fact, as I often say, you know, when I debate people, speaking of skepticism, there are people who don't accept the fact that evolution is a fact. And I've spent an undue amount of time in this country talking to those people. Well, talking to school boards and others in government, trying to get.
Which I want to applaud.
But anyway, but there's this illusion that we somehow have this pact that we shake hands when we get our PhD. Evolution, can't question it, and we want to be right. And the people don't understand that the way to become successful is to prove your colleagues wrong. That's the way to become a well-known scientist, is to make a discovery that proves wrong. So if there was something better than evolution, if it didn't work, you know, Richard would be the first person to want to try and discover it in a sense, because it would mean we'd learn something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we can add something to that, which is that there's an attitude in the culture that says that everybody's entitled to their opinion, and you've got to respect their opinion. No, you damn well haven't got to respect their opinion.
You know, that's a great segue because there's an opinion of Neil's that I don't like, and
Really? Boy, knock me over with a feather.
actually he's going to say it's not an opinion, but let me ask this, jump to this question.
Bring
then.
it on.
Yeah, I figure. Okay. Do you think the privatization of space travel is a hindrance to the long-term goal of deep space exploration?
It should have happened decades ago.
And
Now.
And okay, and actually I agree with you in that sense because, well, I'm not sure decades ago. I think the government had to be involved to learn how to get things going. I don't think
decades ago we knew how to go in and out of low Earth orbit since 1962.
That's right.
So that's decades ago.
That's right, and that's not deep. But that's not deep space exploration. But I think you're absolutely right. The private industry is a perfect place to do low Earth orbit because, and not NASA, because it's boring and dull, and it's.
No, you can generalize it. It's not simply that private enterprise is for low Earth orbit. Private enterprise is for anything where the risks have been pre-assessed by the government investment in the frontier, which is why I think where NASA should live, on the frontier, on the moving frontier, and as that frontier moves, it leaves behind routine. It leaves behind certain needs of the activity, and those needs would then be a void filled by private enterprise who would surely do it more efficiently than any government enterprise can. But the frontier, where it's dangerous, it's expensive, and all the risks are unquantified, you combine these three, you cannot establish a capital market valuation of that frontier, and so therefore government has to take the first step if you're going to do this at all. And that's why the post office doesn't have their own postal planes. You rent space in the belly of Delta Airlines because they can do it more efficiently.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
But that's true of all science. Medicine is the same way. Business is not going to step in and do fundamental research. NIH is going to do it, and they're going to take that risk. And you can apply it any big risk.
And in fact, it's really important. Right now, people are saying, well, you know, you got to fund science that has immediate application. But in fact, the government is there to fund the research that no private industry is ever going to fund because the benefits are a generation away. But in fact, 50% of our gross national product comes from fundamental curiosity-based research a generation ago. And the only way to do that is with the government.
Correct.
Now, we're all agreed with that, but the thing where we may disagree, and I'd be interested to see, because actually it'd be interesting because you're the Planetary Society, and I wonder whether Brian agrees with me on this, because I think many scientists like me would say the frontier doesn't involve people. The frontier that NASA is doing in space, the real science that NASA doesn't involve 100-pound bags of water.
I didn't say science. I talked about
No, I want
exploration.
to. Okay.
There's a distinction here. Yeah. If you only want to do science in space, you would never send humans.
You agree.
would send robots. Even the geologist who would love to go to Mars with a hammer would just love it. If you gave the geologist the option, I can send you to one spot, or I can send 100
spacecraft,
100 rovers to 100 different spots that you can pick. They're picking the 100 rovers.
No, actually, that's not true. I'm in the Department of Geology, among other things, and many of my colleagues there disagree and say they think a geologist could do in a little while what rovers could do. I happen to disagree. I think
no. Did you tell them 100 rovers
in
100 different spots?
I did. You know what? I told them the real number, which is probably 1,000 different rovers, because you can send. Let me finish for a second, Neil. You can send, as I often say, you can send a rover to Mars for the price that it takes to make a movie about sending Bruce Willis to Mars.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
But if you told the geologists it was a one-way trip,
which is what I've argued for.
But they still want to go.
They still want to go.
Yeah, then they're just crazy. I mean, just
No,
why are
are.
you even talking to those
No,
geologists?
so you guys, just if I may speak briefly about the Planetary Society, we are fighting the good fight to restore funding for planetary exploration. We're trying to get $1.5 billion a year, so we need $300 million for planetary science, and it's being threatened. So fiscal year 14 is coming up for NASA. If you got nothing else to do, please check out planetary.org and consider supporting this, because our claim is science is what NASA does best, and planetary science is the best of that. And so we really would like you all to consider supporting it. It is such a good value. It's such an amazing value, so consider. And by the way, it's been estimated that what the rover does, built by our very best rover engineers, driven by our very best rover scientists, rover drivers, who are influenced by our very best scientists, what that does in a week, a human geologist can do in about a minute.
Yeah, but
I agree,
So-
but the
no,
human
so
geologist,
there's the cost.
it's not going to run to 100 different places on the planet.
in fact, actually, the human geologist, I think, most often is not going to make it alive to the planet.
Well, I mean, so on and so on. But
Yeah.
this is where you see it's instead of 10,000 to 1, it's got to be like 1 billion to 1. So we'll get there. The longest journey starts with but a single step.
No, but the other thing I want to, like, let's stay on this topic for a little longer, because I maintain the reason people are interested in humans traveling in space is because they can die. That's what makes it interesting, and you want to see if they're going to die. But you know,
That was NASCAR.
What?
I thought that was NASCAR that you're talking about.
But you know, but I find. But let me ask you a question. I find it. Okay, I'll ask you this question. When I see a picture from the rover, I'm more excited about it coming from the rover than if it came from an astronaut taking the picture, because the astronaut's using a camera, but the rover is taking it's part of the rover.
Let me tell you why that's probably not true, even though you think it is.
Okay.
Okay. Most people don't know that there were robots as well as rovers on the moon while we were first going to the moon. But you didn't know anything about those because the media focused on the astronauts. And it's the astronauts through which we gain vicarious access to space, because they have mouths, they have brains, they have a childhood memory, they have school teachers that can talk about those astronauts. And I've yet to see a ticker tape parade for a robot. So I submit to you that if at the same time the Curiosity rover landed, if at that same time a human astronaut landed on Mars, you would have known nothing about the Curiosity rover.
Yeah, but
it would have been relegated to page 30, and the front page headlines would have been humans put footprints on Mars. And it's that force which will bring less science than the robot that has a power of influence on our culture that inspires an entire generation to want to do the same thing. My generation, when you ask my fellow scientists, should we send humans into space? No, that's too expensive, send robots. Yet I said, well, how did you get interested in space? Oh, because of the Apollo program. And I slap them. I'm saying, what are you...
No, that's it. No, there would
On the other hand, if you remember, if Apollo 13 hadn't been the dramatic failure it was, they would have canceled the rest of the Apollo. They canceled 3 of the last
Couldn't end
missions.
on that note.
There were 3 Saturn V rockets lying on the ground around space, around the country, because it was so interesting that they abolished the last 3.
No, that's delusional, and I'll tell you why.
It's not incorrect.
That's the facts.
No.
You can argue with the facts.
Watch me.
Okay.
So, I'm sorry. Everybody mentioned their book. It's time for me to mention my latest book. It's
I
called
don't think anyone mentioned their book, actually.
My most recent book is titled Space Chronicles, but that wasn't the original title. The original title was Failure to Launch.
But
The dreams and delusions of space enthusiasts. And the publisher says, that's too depressing. You can't have the word failure in your title. But that's what it's about. What you just said is a complete delusion. It presumes that we went to the moon for science. It presumes that we went to the moon to explore it. But that's not why we went to the moon.
Brother Neil, no, it is not. No, it is not.
We went to the moon because we were at war. Sputnik was not just some orbiting spacecraft. It was a hollowed out intercontinental ballistic missile where they took out the warhead and put in a radio transmitter. The military knew this. That's what founded NASA. NASA's budget for science it averaged over all these years about 25%. The rest has been for geopolitical purposes. All right? So it's the I don't want to die driver in this world. That's why we spent all this money. And so the moment we learn Russia's not going to the moon and is certainly not going to Mars, we cancel the program. It had nothing to do with public interest.
Okay, now let me. It is a. Let me try.
I got to pull back.
Yeah, you got to come in. But it is. Let me try and bridge that gap a little bit.
I'm going to be silent.
No, you're not. I think it's really important to point out that this is a political issue. And in fact, me and Buzz Aldrin together testified before the House Science Committee on Space Exploration. And when I said that humans don't do science in space, I didn't argue, in fact, even before the committee, that we shouldn't send humans in space. We should just say honestly why we're doing it. We're doing it for adventure. That's why we're doing it.
No, that's not what funded it.
Hold on.
No, that's not true.
See, you said you wouldn't talk.
I did say.
Okay.
You can say that.
No, hold on.
There's no there. Okay? No. Just look at the history of everybody doing big projects, and it's never driven by exploration. It's never driven by science. It's never driven by curiosity. Not if it's big and expensive. It's driven by the fact that people don't want to die. So there's a war driver. It's also driven by the fact that people want to get wealthy. So
hold on. We have the Large Hadron Collider.
The Large Hadron Collider.
The Large Hadron Collider.
Do you know?
Oh no.
No.
Just proves my point.
The Large Hadron Collider. Please remind me of the total construction cost of the Large Hadron Collider.
I don't know, about $10 billion.
About $10 billion. That is 6 months of NASA funding. So you call that big budget? Not here in America, it's not.
Yeah, NASA's budget's about $17 billion. Doesn't go as far as it used to.
So it's expensive, but not on the scale that we're talking about here.
Okay.
The country shared that. That's not big money.
Okay.
Big money is a shuttle mission costs $1 billion here. I'm not saying it should cost that, but that's what it does. And who writes those checks? It's people who do it for geopolitical reasons, not because they care about science. Our super collider, the one that you would have benefited from, the superconducting super collider. Started to get funding in the 1980s, wasn't it?
Yeah.
200-mile ring, it would have been...
No, 60-mile ring.
60-mile diameter, the circumference.
60 miles around, yeah.
I thought it was 60 times
Well, take
pi.
it from me, it's 60. No, it's 60.
Okay.
Better story with 200, though.
Ryan?
60.
Circumference?
Yeah.
Okay, I've been saying it wrong all these years.
Well,
Never mind.
Thank you.
Never mind.
Okay, no. So watch. So here's a super collider. America would have found the Higgs boson decades ago, all right? So what happens? The budget gets cut for reasons, the cost overruns are there. Excuse me, okay?
Yeah.
It got cut in the early 90s. What happened in 1989? Peace broke out in Europe. All of a sudden, the physicist, who was the hero of the 20th century for making the bomb, is no longer viewed as necessary to national security. And so the project gets cut like that.
Actually, you got it wrong. The project got cut actually for even sillier political reasons, which was the Texas congressional delegation voted the wrong way. And
if we were still at war, that would have never come up.
It's also the International Space Station, right? I mean,
yes, that's true. That's the top story. The bottom story is we don't longer think we're going to die.
So let's leave this topic, but science and politics are, alas, inextricably mixed. And I think...
And politics wins every time.
I think what I would say is that it's vitally important for the public to understand what their issues really are, so they won't be lied to by the politicians effectively, and they can elect people to base policy on empirical evidence and not on ideology or anything else.
Story. Humans tell stories.
Now, there are two more. We'll go a few minutes late because there are two more questions I want to get to. And the last one, perhaps the most important. But Neil, there were a bunch of questions that had to do with science fiction. But please discuss speculative fiction and its role in expanding interest in or knowledge of science in general. Let me just ask a question. How many scientists here read science fiction when they were growing up? You didn't? A little bit. Put your hand up. Make it sound good. Okay, good. There we go. Anyway, Neil, what do you think? What do you think that relationship is?
Well, the kind of science fiction that was coterminous with the Apollo program and the stuff that got us all excited about going to the moon and I think helped create the political support for the kind of big NASA that we've been talking about, hasn't been written in a while. Science fiction kind of took a different turn, and I'm sort of exhibit A of this. So for the last few decades, a lot of science fiction has tended to be darker, more introspective, more about sort of the hero being the kind of hacker who's trying to figure out how to exploit a system that somebody else built, as opposed to the engineer or the scientist discovering or building something new. And I don't know whether there's a cause and effect relationship, but that has coincided with what looks to me like a big drop-off in the rate at which we've made big advances in new ways of getting around, new sort of major infrastructure, space exploration, etc. So I'm trying to pay my debt to society right now by working on a project here at Arizona State, writing some science fiction in a more techno-optimistic vein. It came out of a sort of public argument that I had with Michael Crow a couple years ago, where we were trying to figure out whether science fiction writers could take any share of the blame for this. And so
you're the one.
Yeah. I'm the one. So we're trying this experiment. I'm writing a story about a tower 20 kilometers high for launching rockets off of. And I'm working with people here at ASU on trying to write that story in a kind of technically responsible way. So it's not just pure speculation. And we hope to have other people involved in the project as well.
20 kilometers high?
Yeah.
We could turn that into a sundial.
Oh, the engineers.
Here's the
engineers.
Well, here's the thing. For me, I'm of a certain age. For me, it was Star Trek.
Yeah.
And the thing about Star Trek...
I can't argue with that.
Well, there's technology. Everybody speaks the same language generally, and they beam up and down, which is a huge shortcut. But it was this intensely optimistic view of the future.
Exactly.
And so what I'd like you to do, science fiction guy of the future, is I tell you guys, if you want to worry about things, we are living at a great time. I mean, we've got this worldwide economic crisis, we got human immunodeficiency virus, we've got all kinds of diseases that are resistant to our things. We have what used to be 1.5 billion people, now it's going to be 12 or 15 billion people. And really, everybody here, climate change is the thing. But what if we had an optimistic view of the future where we come up with new technologies, new social structures, where people get along and address climate change and improve the quality of life for everybody? I would love to have that.
Yeah.
Well, just before, as a tribute to my mother, the key to this, the start of this, is to educate women. And this is half of the humans are women or female, because there's some people that are younger. half of the humans are female, so half the scientists should be female. And that would be empowering. And I think gives us the possibility, if you have now suddenly, not suddenly, or in a few decades, have twice as many brains on the problem, we could, dare I say it, change the world.
I just wanted to say that I've actually learned a lot of science from reading science fiction. I think I first came to understand information theory through reading science fiction. The point about scientific discoveries being made independently in different places at the same time, as though there's sort of something in the air. The idea that there are deep problems which we may be ill-equipped to solve, but which are maybe the scientists of 500 years hence will solve. The idea that it's arbitrary what form information comes into the brain, whether it comes in through the eyes or the ears, it's still it's always neurons that finally do it, and so there's a kind of arbitrariness about the nature of the scientific medium. All these things, which I regard as part of my scientific equipment, I got from reading science fiction.
And I think that optimism you talk about is really important. I think it really was one of the things that kept Star Trek going, for example. The idea that science, too often it seems to me in Met science fiction, there's a dystopic view of the future, that science makes the world a worse place. But science has made the world a much better place. People live much happier lives, healthier lives on the whole, and much longer because of science. And so that optimistic view is, I think, incredibly important to push, which is how I'm going to almost end this now, because I think we have gone over time. There is one thing that you pointed out, and there were some questions about this, and I think I want to address it directly, which is the fact that there weren't more women on this panel. I was at the Nobel Prize ceremonies a few years ago, and they addressed the fact that there were more women Nobel laureates. And what they said was, it's a fact that because of societal issues, that women weren't encouraged to go into science. And the Nobel Prizes are given most often for things that have done 20 years earlier or 50 years earlier. And in 50 years from now, half the Nobel Prizes will be for women because there are women in science. And I'm hoping that events like this, we are the old guard for the most of us. Even you. And I'm hoping that we will encourage young women to go into science and go into communicating about science, and so that when we have this panel in the future, we'll have an all-female panel. But thank you very much tonight for coming.
Why don't you stand up and take a bow?
Let's do a bow. Let's do a real bow. No. We gotta do a bow. No. Let's hold hands.
We're going to do that.
Fourth wall.
Drive home safely.
The sun and you and me, all the stars that you can see, are moving at 1,000,000 miles a day in an outer spiral arm at 40,000 miles an hour of the galaxy we call the Milky Way.